It doesn't cost very much at all to get started with retro tech hardware collecting, except when it does. Yeah, I'm not explaining this very well, am I? Right, let's put it this way. You can buy a Commodore 64 from eBay or Facebook Marketplace for relatively little money, a ZX Spectrum for even less. Of course, when your worked in 1986 computer arrives, there's a reasonable chance it will be broken, which will lead you down a whole rabbit hole of retro repairs that ends up with you starting a YouTube channel and staring at this side of the camera, wondering where the last 4 years went. You'll probably buy a couple of mini donkeys along the way. Long story, go and watch my back catalogue. But soon, thanks to eBay, you'll have that thing which gave you so much pleasure in your teenage years. No, not that thing. The other thing. The computer that gave you a start in this exciting world of technology. The thing you fought over with your sibling and shared with your friends. But hardware was only one part of this nebulous thing. Back then, you could pop to the local newsagents and buy a magazine with a cover tape, or pick up a cheap Mastertronic game from W.H. Smith's, shove it in a tape deck and load up all of the interesting stuff which made owning a computer in the 1980s worth the very reasonable asking price. Sadly, those cassette days are long gone. Sure, you can buy second-hand vintage tapes and software from the same eBay and FaceScam marketplace, but there's no guarantee they'll work, and even if they do, they'll often no longer be cheap. And even if I could afford all of those old gems again, I for one rarely have 15 minutes to wait for a game to load. There has to be some perks to living in this future, and there's still no flying cars. These days, most vintage systems, consoles and computers have some form of modern solution to load games. This is my excellent ZX Spectrum Dandinator. I made a video about this a long time ago. It's basically a device you can plug into your ZX Spectrum that allows you to load any game instantly from an SD card. I use mine all of the time. If you want one of these, you can buy them on eBay. In fact, one recently sold for about £54. And this is where my problem starts. EverDrive cartridges for some of the vintage consoles can hit 3 figures. Disk drive replacement devices for things like the PlayStation can be frighteningly expensive. This part of the hobby is not cheap. Or is it? You see, you could save some money by employing a bit of DIY and buying in bulk. This is my Kung Fu Flash. There's quite a few different modern ways of loading software on a C64, but the Kung Fu Flash is my favourite. It plugs into the cartridge port and allows you to load all kinds of different cartridge type things instantly. For example, you can run cartridge-based games, of which there's a huge list of classics. Or you can turn it into an Easy Flash, or an Epix Fast Load, or Simon's Basic, or an Action Replay 4, or 5, or 6. It also supports some disk images, but these can be a bit hit or miss depending on how the original software was written. The best thing about it is the creator, Kim Jørgensen, has freely shared the info you need to make your own one of these on GitHub. I made this one myself, and I also made a bunch more of them for my friends. This is where we get into the group buy part of the video. When I first came across the original Kung Fu Flash, I was tempted to just buy one from eBay, but I realised the project was open source and decided to build my own. I ordered the minimum 5 boards from JLC PCB, other PCB fabricators are available, and all of the other parts listed on the bill of materials from places like AliExpress. Just ordering things from a bill of materials can be a huge amount of work and is always my least favourite part of this process. Ideally, you want to order everything from one place to save on shipping costs, but there's always something out of stock. Once I had all the parts, I soldered them onto those 5 boards, found 4 other people in my circle of friends on Twitter to share the costs and sent them out. It was quite popular, so I did it again for another 5 friends. On this occasion, I chose to let JLC PCB assemble most of the components for me. This was during the chip shortage and lots of items were hard to come by, so there was still plenty for me to do. All 10 of us saved a bundle and I had great fun building them. That was a while ago, and there's been an update from the Kung Fu master Kim Jørgensen. The Kung Fu Flash 2 works in pretty much the same way as the original, but with a few extra bells, or one big bell and a couple of whistles. There's something about cartridge files being loaded into RAM rather than flash. I don't know what difference this makes. Hopefully someone will let us know in the comments. And there's something here about reset. I'm not sure. But the headline here is the addition of REU emulation. For those that don't know, the REU, or RAM Expansion Unit, is it's a RAM expansion unit for the Commodore 64 and C128. This was an add-on sold back in the late 80s and early 90s to expand the 64K of the original machine. usually with an extra 128, 256 or even a mind-boggling 512k of memory, more than anyone could ever need. The most notable thing this allows you to do in this modern world is play that infamous version of Sonic the Hedgehog from Mr. Sid, a direct port of the Master System version of the little blue Hedgehog game. Okay, I want to upgrade to the latest Kung Fu Flash 2. What are my options? Well, eBay is the obvious and simple choice. Here's one which includes a nice case. Ouch, £27.50 with free delivery. It's not a terrible price. The cost of these things are all over the place, although it's worth noting that since putting this project together, the prices have become a little more reasonable. So how about some of that promised DIY? Before we go any further, I just want to point out that I'm in no way, shape or form an expert on this process. Your mileage may vary drastically, and following along with what I do in this video could result in wildly different results. Proceed at your own risk. Right then, how do we go about ordering these things from JLC PCB? Well, the first and main thing you will need is the Gerber files from the Kung Fu Flash 2 GitHub page. There are a few different downloads along the way, and I'll try to explain clearly where you can find each one as we go along. I got the Gerber file from the GitHub page where it says the Gerber files and BOM can be found here. I created a directory in a safe place where I knew I could find it again. Let's call the directory KF2 and the safe place my desktop, and copied the Gerber zip file into there. If you look inside this zip file, you'll find all of the special files that tell the machines at JLC all of the important things about making the PCB. Things like the dimensions and where to drill the holes, and where the silkscreen markings go. Leave the Gerber file zipped. While I had that page open, I downloaded the bill of materials file and the update file too. Next, take yourself off to jlcpcb.com and sign up for an account. I should point out that I'm not sponsored by JLC PCB or indeed anyone else. Click up here on Order Now. On the next page, click on the big blue Add Gerber button at the top of the page. Navigate to the zipped Gerber file and select that. After a few seconds of uploading, you should get a preview of the board at the top of the screen. All of the choices you can see below are okay to leave as default, with many of them being set by the Gerber file. You don't really need to change anything, but if you did want to change the colour of the board, you can do so now. I quite like purple boards. You can also change the material the board surface is finished with. Hazel or hot air... Oi, editing Lee, stop scratching yourself and concentrate. Right. Hazel or hot air solder leveling is basically just a solder finish on all of the pads and edge connector fingers. It's not an ideal finish for edge connectors and isn't very durable, but the spirit of this project is value, so we're sticking with it. If you want some bling, and also to create a much more durable finish, you can switch this to Enig or Electroless Nickel Immersion Gold. But look what happens to the price. We're on a tight budget here, so I'm going to select Hazel. Something else you might want to explore at this stage is the amount of boards you require. I offered to run a group buy on our Retro Hardware Discord server, link in the description, which seemed to be a very popular request. I limited the run to 15 first come first serve, so I wasn't taking on too much. The price of 5 bare boards is not very different to 10 or 20, but the assembly and component costs will rise in a more linear fashion. Also, the postage costs can jump suddenly if you go over a weight threshold. Well, the price is certainly right at this stage, but there is another step which will push the costs up a bit. JLC not only makes the board for you, they can also solder all the bits on it too. Click the PCB assembly button down here to start this part of the order process. Assembly is free, which is pretty cool. I think this might be a coupon thing, but who knows. The first thing I changed is this confirm parts placement. This will mean someone at JLC checks the parts to make sure they are the right type, the right way round and in the right place. This actually saved us on this group buy event where the wrong crystal had been selected and JLC picked it up and gave us the chance to select a different part. Amazingly, they don't charge you for this essential step, but it isn't selected by default. Now, this is where we run into a problem. This section here, parts selection, is where we need some more info. The bill of materials, or BOM, we already downloaded from the GitHub page. This gives you a spreadsheet list of all the parts, their locations on the board, their type, and even a link to AliExpress. Now, you have a couple of choices. JLC offers a service where they will take this BOM and convert it for you into the information they need to put the parts in the right places from their own stock. They charge $10 for this, and it can take them a couple of days to process, which is pretty reasonable, I think. But if you're lucky enough to know some clever people like I do, you can get them to do this for you. I asked my friend Julian, who's no stranger to ordering weird boards from PCB fabricators, you should see his dragon creations, to take a look, and he supplied me with the required files, including the links to JLC PCB parts, which means we can move on to the next step. Clicking next here will give us a board preview, and clicking next again brings us to this page. The first one is easy. We have this file. Clicking Add Bill of Materials and browsing to the file I downloaded earlier gives us a friendly tick. But what about this CPL file? What's that all about? Well, a CPL file is a component placement list, which tells JLC exactly where all of the parts go and which way round they need to be installed. And that file is not included on the Kung Fu Flash 2 GitHub page. Back to Julian, who informs me that you can indeed generate your own CPL file by importing the project files from the GitHub page into something like KiCad and then generating the CPL file. Well, I'm not jumping into the PCB design rabbit hole just yet, so I asked Julian if he wouldn't mind generating them for me. He worked his magic and sent over the project files I needed, specifically the positions.csv file, but also an updated bill of materials file. After uploading both the new bill of materials file and the CPL file and clicking Process BOM and CPL, I get this error message. This is actually nothing to worry about. TP1, 2 and 3 are all test points and not populated. J1 and 3 are jumper positions and not needed here. SW1, 2 and 3 are buttons and I will add those myself later. So I can click Continue, which then gives me a list of all of the parts Julian added to the bill of materials. If you do this yourself, you might get one or more parts flagged as out of stock. In this case, the SD card slots were out of stock. To speed things up, I elected to buy and install those myself. Alternatively, you can click the search button and select a different suitable part from JLC PCB, if you happen to know what to look for. Clicking Next will prompt JLC to ask you what you want to do about the missing parts. I click Do Not Place. This means they will just leave those unpopulated and I'll have to fit those myself. Next we get, after a short wait, a preview of the board with all of the parts. If this doesn't appear, just refresh the browser and click through again. This preview is handy as it shows you the polarity of the components and you can check they're the right way round. Things with polarity are clearly marked with pink designators and the silk screen on the board shows the polarity or orientation, so it's pretty easy to check. Clicking Next brings you to the first page where you can get an idea of the total price. This isn't the final price though. Next on this screen you will need to declare what the purpose of this item will be. I selected Entertainment, Other, and in the field below typed Vintage Computer Peripheral. After this you can select Save to Cart. Which brings us to the final score of this part of the build. Click the box on the left to select the item in your cart, which will add the shipping cost. It's worth clicking into the shipping section just to make sure you're on the cheapest option. And that's all there is to it. Just over £100 for 15 almost complete Kung Fu Flash 2 cartridges. Remember those ones on eBay? You could buy 3 of those for the same price. But to be fair, they came with fancy cases, and this price doesn't include the SD card slots which were out of stock. So we have a bit more to add to the total. Once paid for, JLC will inspect the build and let you know of any problems. In my case, they flagged up that the crystal was the wrong package. I told them to proceed without installing it and ordered the crystals from AliExpress along with the SD card slots they didn't have in stock at the time. After about 10 days of impatiently glaring at the postman, a package arrived from JLC PCB. Also, around the same time, the crystals and the SD card slots arrived too. I need to finish putting these together. First, a clean up with some IPA just to get any residue and oxidization off the board. The crystal is a little awkward. The pads are tucked underneath and there's a good chance if I stuff the tip of my soldering iron under there, I'll melt something important. So this time I'll be using solder paste. Thank you, Ian, for the solder paste. A small blob on each of the pads, not too much or it goes everywhere. Then just drop the crystal into place. It doesn't need to be perfect. Just to be ultra cautious, I'm heating the board from below. The solder paste has a melting point of 138 degrees C, but to get the heat through the board, I've set my hot air station to 330 degrees C. I'm being careful to keep the heat moving around. Leaving it in one spot for too long can damage things. The flux is already boiled and we now wait for the tiny solder balls that make up the paste to go molten. There, very satisfying. I can give it a little nudge just to make sure it's sitting where it needs to be. And with the heat removed, the solder will freeze. Nice. It's worth cleaning off the extra solder balls. I don't want these to get caught between the pins of that quad flat pack chip nearby. The SD card slots are a bit different. I could probably do these with solder paste too, but I find that more tricky to work with than just flux and a hot iron. These SD card slots are keyed into the board with plastic lugs, so it's not a difficult thing to position. A blob of flux on all of the parts I need to solder. Not too much though, I don't want sticky flux working its way inside the slot where it will cause problems. I'm using this MG Chemicals 8341 flux. It has the benefit of not boiling away when heated, but it does need cleaning up. Despite saying no clean, a dab of solder on the tip of my iron. I have this set to around 350 degrees C for modern boards. And I'm using good quality leaded solder. Holding the slot in place, I solder one mounting leg, taking care to make sure the solder flows onto the pad and up onto the side of the slot casing. Another blob of solder for one of the legs on the other side, and it's secured. I can now solder the other legs. And then the pins one at a time. A quick inspection and a prod with a pair of tweezers just to make sure. Out of an abundance of caution, I flood the slot with IPA and blast it out with my compressed air gun. This was a birthday present from my friend Jørgensen. That's the tricky stuff done, which just leaves 3 buttons to be soldered in place. These were kindly given to the group by the lovely Henry, a stalwart of the retro hardware Discord. They are 6x6 by 5mm tactile buttons and easily purchased anywhere. Installing these is a simple job. Just push them into their positions and the bent legs will hold them in place. It's still worth soldering one leg and then making sure they're sitting flush on the board, or they won't work when this is installed inside a case. These positions for pin headers are for programming purposes. That's easy for you to say. But to save some work, I won't be installing anything here. The only thing I need to do to program the ARM STM32 microcontroller is connect the boot pin here to 3.3 volts. To do that, I just push a couple of pin headers with a jumper installed into the holes and hold it there whilst I program the chip. Speaking of which, there are different ways to program this chip. After it's been programmed the first time, the easiest way to then update it is to just place the update file on the SD card and select it in the Kung Fu Flash 2 launcher. But the initial firmware programming needs to be done a different way. The recommended way is to connect an ST-Link V2 programmer to the pin headers I mentioned before, and then use the STM32 Cube software to install the firmware. The problem with this method is an ST-Link V2 programmer, which you can pick up super cheap from Amazon, won't actually work. ST have locked out cheap clone programmers. Ask me how I know. A real programmer, which I'm sure will work from a reputable store, costs a fair chunk more change, kind of defeating our best value intentions. The less recommended way is the USB method. It doesn't require a separate programmer, but it is a bit more fiddly to set up in software. Let's go through it here and you can make up your own mind. Going back to the GitHub page, there is a link in the USB programming section which takes you to DFU Utility. This is a universal tool used to program all kinds of devices, including the STM chip we have on this board. Download the latest version of DFU Util and decompress this archive to your KF2 directory. I'll use 7-zip for this. I'll right click and drag the file to the desired location and then select extract with its file name as the folder to preserve the folder structure so it doesn't get mixed in with the other files. Next, the USB drivers need to be registered, and for this there are nice clear instructions linked on the DFU utility page under libusb wiki, and I recommend the Zadig tool to get this part done. Just install this program, run it and click this button to install the drivers. Well, that's what I tried to do the first time, and somehow I managed to mess up a bunch of USB drivers on my bench PC, which lost me a day having to sort it all out. What I didn't realise at this point is you need the Kung Fu Flash 2 board attached in boot mode for it to recognise and install the drivers correctly. A bit like this. To keep things simple, I copied the firmware for the Kung Fu Flash 2 I downloaded earlier to the Win64 directory of the DFU utility folder. Open up a command line window here. Here's a handy shortcut. Just type CMD into the Explorer address bar and hit return. Then paste the command from the Kung Fu Flash 2 GitHub firmware README into this window. Delete the last part up to V2 and press tab on your keyboard. If the update file is in the right place, it should autofill this command. Don't press return just yet. Now with the jumper pressed into the boot and 3.3 volt positions, plug a micro USB cable into the Kung Fu Flash 2 and the other end into your PC or a handy USB hub. It should make a device inserted sound. Run the command, and if all is well, you should see a brief progress bar and other info followed by a message saying it all went well. If you didn't, you might not have had the jumper in the right position, or it might not have been making good contact when you plugged in the USB cable, or you might not have properly installed the WinUSB drivers with the Zadig tool like I did. Try again by unplugging and plugging it back in, making sure the jumper is making good contact, and then running the command again. If you're successful, unplug the USB cable, remove the jumper, and you have a functional Kung Fu Flash 2. Well, mostly. 2 of these boards didn't work. The first one failed to program at all and turned out to have a dead short to ground somewhere. I searched around the main IC and first spotted that one of the legs was not soldered to its pad.
Ah. Well, the last one.
A dab of solder fixed this. I probed every pin on this package to look for the short and found one here. Reflowing it didn't help, but further probing revealed a second short on the other side of the chip in a similar position. I believe these mirror the pins on the other side and are connected in the same way. Reflowing these cleared the short, which brought the board back to life. The second faulty board programmed fine, but when it came to testing it in a C64, it just didn't work at all. Again, I got it under the microscope and probed around for shorts, finding one on these 2 pins here. Checking the same pins on a working board shows there's not supposed to be a short. It's really hard to see anything bridging the contacts. My assumption is the problem is behind the pins on the area of the pads hidden by the legs of the chip. I have to say it was a little disappointing to find 2 of these 15 boards were basically faulty. I did manage to fix both of them myself, but I'm quite fortunate to have the equipment and experience necessary to do this. At one point I was mulling over what we would do in the group buy situation if these boards were dead. Probably the last person to sign up would have to drop out. I don't know, it would have spoiled the fun for sure. I have reached out to JLC PCB for comment on this issue, and this is what they said. The factory has checked it and so sorry for the trouble caused for the solder bridge. We suppose the solder paste printing may not be quite well at that time. For the pin not soldered, the pin is deformed and upward. We have informed the factory to pay more attention for such issues in future production. The way I've read that, I think what Emma is saying is they had a bad day and we'll do better next time. We all have bad days sometimes. Okay, we have 15 working Kung Fu Flash 2 cartridges. What else do we need? One thing the eBay listing carts didn't come with was an SD card. I bought a load of these super cheap 1 GB ones from Amazon. Insert this into a reader, format it to FAT32. Now is a good time to copy across some software such as cart images. Pop the SD card into the Kung Fu Flash 2, stick that into the back of your C64 and switch it on. If nothing happens, try pressing the menu button, which should bring you into the Kung Fu Flash 2 menu. This is all you really need, but to finish it off nicely, a case makes it safer to use and nicer to handle. For our group buy, I asked my friend Fuzzy Lee, who recently treated himself to one of those fancy bamboo printers, to print off some cases. I set aside £2 for each one of these to cover his filament and electricity costs, and Lee printed us some lovely cases in translucent PETG. They certainly make my old one look a bit shabby. I was so impressed with these, I bought myself a bamboo printer for my birthday, and then all of the bamboo controversy kicked off. Oh well. The cart fits into place in one half of the shell, and then the buttons go into these positions in the top half with the translucent one over the LED. And then the top half, well, it goes on top, like you'd expect. A small screw secures the 2 halves together. But make sure you use a long enough screw or this might happen. My Kung Fu Flash just fell apart because the screw's not long enough. And that's it, except for one thing. This section here is where a sticker needs to go. And we have some rather special ones designed by Retrofied Dan of the Retro Collective. Dan is a genius at this type of thing and never fails to impress. If you need something printed or stuck to something, he can probably help you get that made. Google Retrofied and you'll find his website. These stickers are printed on a special vinyl that has a super sticky adhesive backing. The reason Dan recommended these is because the way these cartridges are 3D printed, face down on this side, leaves this indented section here where the sticker needs to go super rough. I thought it would be fairly simple to smooth these sections out with a chisel and a sanding block, but it turned into much more work than I expected, and the finish wasn't great. By this time I bought my own bamboo printer and decided to adjust the cartridge STL file to smooth out the indented part to make it easier to print. The sticker would be proud of the surface, but I think this is the best compromise. I printed out a bunch of these top halves of the cases and then realised I'd used the wrong STL file. The buttonholes on this version don't match up with the Kung Fu Flash 2 buttons. I'm still confused as to where I found this one. So that's all of these original tops and all of these replacement tops in the bin. I better get printing the next batch. With these now finished, the last thing to do is put all of the stickers on, which really makes them look like the finished article. Time to put it through its paces. Yes, there's nothing like the instant loading of a cartridge-based game. Atari really had it right with the 2600. How about that expanded memory? What can we do with that? Well, the only game I know which requires extra memory is the aforementioned Sonic the Hedgehog port. Let's try that. Here is my Pi 1541, which Dan Tootle gave me. Yes, Dan, I've finally built it. It takes quite a while to load. I've only just started using this and haven't figured out fast loaders with this combination of devices, but let's fast forward to the good bit. And then the actual good bit. It works a treat. I was also informed since recording this part that I could just load the Sonic file using the Kung Fu Flash 2. So much easier and faster. I'm not a big Sonic fan, but to my uneducated eyes, this feels pretty much exactly the same as the original to me. Now, was it all worth it? And what was the final score in terms of cost? The prices I paid won't be the same for you, and the examples I've shown in this video were not the same as the prices our group paid. Also, some of the parts were donated and some were mates rates. But I'll share the figures here so you can get some idea of the costs. The boards from JLC PCB came to £83.46. I think this might have been subject to a coupon, but that's often the case with JLC. We paid Fuzzy Lead £30 for the cases. The missing parts that were not in stock with JLC were the crystals at £5.62 and the SD slots at £11.46, both from AliExpress. I ordered extra of both of these just to make sure I didn't run into problems with faulty items. Henry donated the buttons and Fuzzy Lee donated a bunch of packaging boxes. And the stickers were a special price of £15 from Dan at Retrofied. All of that came to just over £11.70 per person. Only 7 of the group wanted SD cards, so those were sorted separately and I won't include the costs here. But for reference, they cost £2 each. I didn't charge anyone for Haribo. Personally, I think this was a very worthwhile exercise. It takes a little more work than just ordering one from eBay, but the value is without doubt. There were a few hurdles to clear along the way, but in the end I managed to put together all 15 working cartridges, package them up safely, and then send them off to their new owners. Group buying is an excellent way to save money, but I would say be aware of the risks. Be upfront with everybody taking part. If things go horribly wrong, the costs should be shared and not down to one individual that was willing to help everyone else out. And as for the Kung Fu Flash 2, it's an excellent device that serves the intended purpose of loading software from an SD card with the extra bells and whistles from the REU memory add-on. Do you think it's worth it? Let me know in the comments what your favourite bargain device is. I might even be tempted to build one. And before you go, I just wanted to mention I have a second channel. Well, I've had one for a while now called More Fun Making It Too. A name that didn't take a whole heap of time to come up with. Well, now it's been rebranded. The second channel is called More Fun Fixing It, and I've been busy fixing lots of things on that channel. This does mean there won't be as much fixing things on the More Fun Making It channel, but the name didn't really make sense anyway. From now on, this channel will be for the meaty, in-depth stuff, much like the video you've just watched. And thank you for watching all of the way to the end. You're the loyal ones. If you like this video, please consider giving me a like and maybe a subscribe. And if you've totally lost your mind, go subscribe to More Fun Fixing It too. What's the worst that could happen? Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.